I will never look at grief the same way again. I remember the moment when grief, the concept of grief, completely blew up my life. The moment I was forever changed by it and ultimately found life-changing growth from it. It was a situation where I felt broken in half, outside of myself, completely crushed under the weight of it and uncertain about anything. There wasn't sleep to be found, no appetites in which to find nourishment, no place to root myself in except the devastating acknowledgement that the grief I was languishing under was not my own. And this is where this awakening took place, in the face of death. I got a call 5 years ago from a friend of a friend. It was right as I was getting ready for bed, a perfectly normal spring night. The call was at such a time and from such a person that when my eyes glanced to see the name, my entire body immediately responded. Panic flooded my chest, my arm hair stood on end, and I remember cutting off my husband mid-sentence as I answered the phone and walked away from him. Within seconds, all the air was sucked out of my lungs while the world stood completely still. It's one of those moments where you're so inside of yourself that you can hear the blood rushing through your veins. They had called to tell me the horrific news that the husband of one of our closest friends had just taken his life. I remember crumbling in horror of hearing these words over that phone line. I instantly grabbed a bag out from under my bed and started filling it with clothes. The chasm of the distance and states between myself and my beautiful friend, whose entire world had just shattered, felt impossibly far. I had to get to her. I immediately purchased the soonest flight, and what followed was the maddeningly slow process of closing the physical gap from me to her. Everything took forever, waiting for Dawn to arrive, to drive to the airport, waiting on that plane ride, trying not to blast emotions over everyone that I came in contact with, navigating the terminal to find my ride to get to my friend. I felt like I was holding my breath the entire way until the moment I laid eyes on her. I will never forget that moment. There is power in physically laying eyes on the ones you love who are experiencing loss. This was the first shift felt inside myself. My own life was drop-kicked out to left field, and this is one of the things I will never, ever regret. I actually had people who questioned that choice, and I have reflected on it numerous times. Each time I come back to what I know to be true. I will never regret choosing to be there with her over keeping things convenient for myself and others. It felt like I took my first gulp of air in over 14 hours. She is alive. Those are my first thoughts. But barely is what I quickly came to realize. The mission became very clear within the first hour of being there, and this was my second internal shift. And being there with her in each appointment as the funeral was planned, each person stopped by as news spread, and each hour of the night passed and sleep came in small, fitful bursts. This person wasn't sure if they were going to survive this. And I quickly came to the absolutely painful realization, because I am a helper, a 2 on the Enneagram, look it up to understand that absolute true anguish, that I couldn't save her. All I could do was be with her, to keep glasses of water ever within reach, to make meals that have gone cold and untouched hot again, to give back massages during moments between grieving visitors, to keep migraines at bay. I slept when she slept, asked questions to help process through whatever topic was on hand, gave hair strokes when the tears inevitably came, and made up excuses for us to step away when the air was impossibly thick, with the weight of expectations from others weighting through the grief. Grief is such a mess. So much so that we are constantly at war with ourselves in our desires to run from it, stuff it, silence it, minimize it, and make sense out of it. I watched this play out over and over again as my friend stood receiving person after person after person at her husband's funeral. She stood there for hours on no sleep, having eaten 3 meals in the last 4 days. She found herself in this place not only due to the grief that was robbing her of rest and appetite, but also because of the relentlessness of human beings vying for the space to perform their due diligence. It was in that moment, watching her standing there, when I realized how utterly broken our world is in our ability to respond to grief. Without realizing, we had robbed ourselves and each other of the opportunity to walk through it in a way that brings freedom and fullness in place of weariness and emptiness. We get into that receiving line to speak to the widow, so often because of this unspoken expectation that this is what we must do. We make decisions, have conversations, and set things into motion based on our own guilt and shame as the main motivator. The biggest consequences of this being that we heap this thinly veiled sense of false care onto those experiencing the loss, and simultaneously rob ourselves of the practice of sitting with those grieving. When, more often than not, the moment calls for our mere existence in it, without any kind of action beyond physically letting that person know that they are not alone in their grief. We need to go into these spaces of grief remembering to strip away our own perceived sense of expectations, lest we find ourselves being the one comforted on the shoulder of the actual person who has been rocked by loss. It wasn't until I lived with someone going through unimaginable loss that I realized how deeply held my misperceptions of how to do grief were, how much my own discomfort had dictated my responses to someone else's grief, how willing I was to flee discomfort instead of showing up in the heart to see open wounds receive their first opportunities towards healing, to watch the humanness of deep emotion take their natural forms. It was the first time I realized I was not doing everything in my power to shield myself from pain and grief. I've learned that it is not better not to ask someone a poignant question about their grief. I've learned that my very own tone in asking how someone is doing can so often be one of pity, which is unhelpful. Or my tone implies an expected response of, "I'm fine." That is one area I hold the hardest to. May we either leave the question unasked or allow the respondent the space to answer in truth whatever that truth may be. I've learned that the loneliness of grief gets all the more louder 2 months, 2 years, and a lifetime down the road. That a person loved by others is always worth asking about, no matter how much time has passed. My calendar has begun filling with as many anniversaries of loved ones passed as those celebrating births. I want to learn how to do better at intentionally entering those spaces with those I love. I'm learning to work really hard at existing in the awkwardness that is grief. It comes in so many forms, yet in any form it cannot be fixed, wiped away, ignored, or forgotten. If you're ever under the impression that it can, you are surely doing yourself and those around you a disservice. Not one person in this world is unaffected by this word, grief. We all have faced it. We all have felt lost in it. It doesn't just come from death. There are thousands of paths that lead us to face it, and thus thousands of opportunities in each of our lifetimes to grow from it and for it. Start by giving yourself space to walk through your own grief differently. So often we administer band-aids over deep wounds in our haste to acquire normalcy once again, rushing through the process without any opportunity for ourselves to find healing, which in the end just means that there is an entire earth filled with millions of broken and wounded humans. We do not need to wait for someone else to administer this care to us. While on the same token, we should not wait for someone else to administer care to those who we know are hurting. Let it be you, for fear of it not being someone else, or someone who leads with their own fear of grief, much like I did for most of my life before that eye-opening experience alongside my friend. May we cry, feel deeply, be okay to talk about our grief, to ask questions of others about theirs. May we find normalcy in still talking about grief months and even years after facing these losses. May we find more and more safe spaces where we are met with more and more opportunities to share the full spectrum of our thoughts and emotions, because they are vast, beautiful, and beneficial to our growth as human beings. Grief is inevitable, but our fearful, ignorant, or uncomfortable responses don't have to be. This revelation, as hard as it was, as hard as it continues to be, brought an awakening that I would never want to be ignorant of again. And so I share it with you in the hopes to start a conversation that may lead to greater freedom in these inevitable spaces of grief.